I also write nonfiction sometimes, and mostly I write fiction. This particular project has been different for me in some respects, because before, when I was living in Los Angeles, I wrote mostly about, themes that were closer to home. For example, more gay themes, themes more related to immigration, themes more related to, for example, crisis of identity, etc. Stuff that I was more, at the time I was living through. Since I've been living here in Barcelona for the last 4 years, I've been allowing myself to experiment, I think, in different ways, which has been really freeing, creatively speaking. To give you a little bit of context before I read, I'm going to read the latest story that I finished, actually, from this collection. They're all a series of interconnected short stories in a fictional Catalan town. The first is about an old man that has this terrible fear of death, which I read last time, and it was accompanied a companion piece by a woman whose husband is cheating on her, and she finds out about him, etc., etc. And this story is from the point of view of the husband when he's out with his mistress, and it's called Mondays. That's when she kissed him. Right after he'd warned her yet again, his eyes peeking nervously through the dim, desolate cafe for a familiar face, that this wasn't the place or the time, that they needed to be careful. She pulled away and looked down at the cooling cup of coffee, her gaze searching the clouded drink as if she had lost something inside of it. And in a burst of action that he could only describe as a childish revelation, she kissed him again. She leaned across the rickety table, grabbed his tense expression between her pink lacquered nails, and smacked his lips loudly. He smelled her coffee-stained breath as she pulled away. For a moment, wearing that girlish smile, she almost looked shy. He again felt that familiar mix of indignation and the overwhelming desire to possess her. The elderly couple that was in the bar, the only other patrons, turned around briefly to see what had made that strange sucking sound. As if summoned, which is also a really true story, as if summoned, the waiter came over and slowly cleared their used plates from the table. He held his breath and was relieved when, unperturbed, the couple went back to watching the news. The city soccer team had won another championship. There was a plague of bedbugs in a district near the port. The Pope had taken a spill while celebrating Mass, crimson papal underrobes flacking mockingly at Roman crowds. Dabbing at the beads of sweat on his hairline, his cheeks suddenly began to feel cooler. It wasn't the first time, of course, that she made him feel so compromised in public. Every unlawful kiss was followed by him bracing, shoulders hunched, for the inevitable. A scorned shout of recognition, an unexpected slap. Whether it was his wife, or her friends, or some unnamed acquaintance, he knew someone would find them out eventually. But he wanted it to last as long as it could. He already took care not to touch her too much in public, resisting the temptation to run his fingers through her dark hair and pull her tiny mouth toward him. She, however, who was now stirring the frigid coffee aimlessly, talking nonsense with her eyes, was painfully unconcerned about everything. Until recently, every Monday afternoon they had lunch at a bar or cafe on the outskirts of the pueblo. Her mother, whom he'd never even seen, went to the retirement home for a dance class at 2:30. That's when they arrived and, pulling down the shades, drank deeply of each other, precisely because it was forbidden, until 4:15. Then they'd clean up the scattered clothes and sodden sheets before her mother came back precisely at 4:30. He went back home and, avoiding his wife, cuddled with her black and white cat, which appears in the story. She pretended to have been doing housework. She pretended, meanwhile, to have been doing housework. It was a glorious routine. Lunch hastened by anticipation, followed by sweat-stained satisfaction, until the day it became too risky. He had a close call a week ago when, upon walking into the agreed-upon panaderia, he saw that friendly fat woman, a cashier at the Capravo, the one that works with his wife, patiently eating a chocolate croissant. Starting to turn on his toes, she waved at him and, to his horror, shouted a hasty bon dia over the din. He had told his wife that he was going to the office for a conference call, and she'd nodded, barely looking up from the dishes. Obligingly, he'd made idle comments about the heat wave as she ate, flakes from her croissant falling into her turquoise blouse. Of course, she'd asked about his wife, and he thought she held his gaze just a little bit longer, as if waiting for an answer. He'd taken a step back, some bland response already forming on his lips, and accidentally bumped into an older woman who was making her way toward a table, tray in hand. Her coffee spilled all over her white blouse, and he apologized as he dabbed at the mess. She scolded him, saying he needed to be more careful. He felt his cheeks begin to burn. The older woman, mid-50s or so, was wearing a necklace from which hung an oversized golden cross. For a moment, he remembered his wedding day and the huge crucifix that towered over the altar, and the sleepy Christ that looked down on them, and he thought about how cruel a thing love really could be, having thorned its way into his spirit. By the time he made it back to his car, he was in full panic. He called Monday. That was what he called his mistress, because he liked the way it rolled off his tongue. Lunes, Monday. And asked her to meet at the park instead. She'd groaned, saying she'd already parked and didn't feel like driving anymore, but vale. After that, there was no place in the pueblo that felt safe enough. So instead they met here, in the city, on an anonymous shadowed street. I told you, we don't know anyone here, she said to him back in the cafe. For a moment he was startled by the seriousness in her voice. Relax. She picked up a small spoon and began to stir the coffee once more. A thin film, something like gasoline dribbled on a puddle, had formed on it. And no one knows her either. He unlinked his fingers and looked at her. The shadow of a smile passed over her face before disappearing, submerged. She set the spoon down, staining the cheap linen cloth. So will you relax now? She asked him, and took a deep sip of the stale coffee. He looked away, slightly repulsed, imagining the metallic taste washing over her teeth. She set the mug down on the saucer and pushed it toward him. She had become again that cold, distant star. I'm sorry, he said. He took her hand. It felt warm and youthful. It stayed limp, but he squeezed it anyway, hopeful for a response. It's two, she said. She picked up his hand and kissed it. Another burst of childish glee. This time he didn't flinch away. We can start heading home and... She bit his knuckles playfully, and he laughed. She leaned across the table slightly and placed a single elbow on the table. He saw the curve of her breast, glossy in the cafe's fluorescent light. Let's go, he said. He stood up and, after paying the bill, walked arm in arm with her into the twisted, endless streets. They walked in the shade of the buildings whenever they could, avoiding the sun that was blazing angrily in the sky. They passed the silent beggars with their handwritten pleas. They smelled the urine-stained doorsteps. They covered their ears as an ambulance's siren screamed helplessly as it passed. It was hot and sticky, and the air in the city was heavy. And he was relieved when, sweaty, they finally got back to the car. And he thought about that time 3 weeks ago they'd gone to the forest instead. Her mother had been sick, and so had stayed home that day. Unsure of what to do, he thought about taking her back to his house, like he had once before, foolishly. But instead they'd simply sat under the trees, staring up at the patches of blue sky as they revealed themselves between the leaves. And it was there, where the trees are blind and the stones have no names, that he felt most at ease with her, where he recognized that sense of longing and affection that he thought was lost and forgotten in him. For a while, he didn't worry about nosy neighbors or wives grown cold and ashen to his embrace. In fact, he didn't think about much at all. Except how much he liked being in the forest with this new girl half his age who had twice his energy. She wasn't the prettiest. He knew that. That was okay. He'd been promising her that he'd talk to the woman that was legally his wife, quote-unquote, as soon as he could save more money. Enough to pay for the divorce and rent an apartment and be able to support not just himself, but Monday as well. And maybe even a baby. Without the fear of being discovered, in the forest he was collected and calm enough to feel courageous. Or almost so. But then his determination was unspun by the fear of a hiker that just might recognize his balding scalp sitting on those moss-kissed rocks with a lover that, yes, was young, but also plain. As he drove, he felt the first stirrings of his youthful resoluteness again, and put his hand on her knee all the way back to the pueblo, and he even kissed her. If he and his wife had run out of love, he reasoned, the only response then was to make more of it for someone else. They arrived at the apartment where Monday lived with her mother. She didn't say a word and led him to her bedroom. She closed the door, silently fell to her knees, and took him into her mouth. He leaned his back against the frame, seeing the familiar yellowed curtains and unmade bed, and let himself seep into her, bending down to undress her with one hand. She looked up at him hungrily as she moved, her eyes closing slightly in what he took to be a look of pleasure. As he pulled her onto her feet and then pushed her onto the bed, her pimpled back arched toward him, he thought of the freedom that he was on the cusp of achieving. He would one day have this all day, every day of the week, and though perhaps it wouldn't be forever, it would be just long enough. He entered her, escaping one reality, building another that was all her own. She gasped as he picked up speed, the slight bulge of her belly moving to the rhythm of his thrusts. He closed his eyes and bit his lower lip, as if biting down on some spiritual truth to keep it from escaping. The next time he opened his eyes, the door was wide open, and the woman he took to be her mother was standing there, expressionless as the moon. A gold cross hung guiltily on her chest. Someone, he didn't know who, slammed the door shut. Monday climbed into the unmade bed without a sound and pulled the sheets over herself. And he, still erect, still on his knees in mid-thrust, listened to her mother screaming on the other side of the door, necklace and jewelry striking the cheap wooden frame. Time, wherever it had hit it, was also waiting to release its breath. That's one story, it's called Monday. And the last one I'm going to read is from the point of view of his wife, which is called The Unnamed Lover, which last time I read also. I changed a little bit. The Unnamed Lover. The goddamn cat wouldn't come out from underneath the bed. Again. And that's when the wife, resigned, threw up her hands to say, "See, I'm done trying." It was the 5th time this week alone that the cat had scurried under the bed, a tight spring of black and white fur that clawed at her when she tried pulling him out. The entire time that her husband, should she get used to saying ex-husband, had been living and lying here, the cat had never misbehaved. Not one angry scratch, not a single unwelcome nibble. But nothing, especially the cat, had been the same after her husband, who was probably on his way to that horse house, the one without a name, stopped by to pick up the last of his clothes earlier in the week, sealing the tomb of the relationship. The wife picked up the cat's bowl from the hallway and knelt at the side of the bed. "Vinga, cariño, vinga," she cooed to him, feeling slightly foolish. The cat had never paid much mind to her from the start, preferring the rough strokes of her husband's large, dry hands. She strained to make her voice sweet, but the cat only widened its green eyes with fear. "As stubborn as its owner," she sighed. She got up the floor and, after scooping up the bowl, went into the kitchen. Perhaps she could find something to entice the cat into coming out. In the nearly empty pantry, she found a can of tuna, a relic from their last trip to the grocery store as a married couple. Thumbing its contents into the cat's bowl, licking the oil off her salty fingertips, his memory floated up to her. It was automatic, involuntary. Wending through the cereal aisle and fruit displays and liquors, her husband complaining about the rising price of everything. The grocery store was full of other couples doing their Saturday morning shopping, and when she slipped her hand in his back pocket to fish out his wallet, and when she couldn't have imagined that it would all end that very night. That even after she'd reconciled the mysterious bank withdrawals with the mocking wrinkled sheets, the only thing she wanted was a name. Her name, followed by a face to pummel, to punish. Her husband at first had denied everything, of course. Only when she shattered their honeymoon photo, the one where they were impossibly young, where she saw 2 strangers in the full bloom of life. Only then did he finally admit to the affair. Another woman in the Pueblo had stolen him away, apparently. But he wouldn't say who, no matter how much she screamed at him, or scratched the buttons on his shirt as he stormed down the building stairwell, wearing only his pajama bottoms. Now, standing in the kitchen, staring